This isn't me. Or is it? Why does the person in the mirror look at me with the eyes of a stranger? That question had become the low, incessant hum beneath the surface of my life. It was a background frequency I couldn't tune out, a quiet static that distorted everything. On the outside, I was Dorian, a respectable, if somewhat invisible, 20-something art history intern at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. My life was a curated collection of muted tones and straight lines. My wardrobe was a uniform of self-effacement crisp white shirts, inoffensive gray or navy cardigans, and dark, sensible trousers. It was a costume designed to say nothing at all, to allow me to blend into the white walls of the galleries, as unassuming as a placard on the wall. I was neat, I was tidy, I was a ghost haunting the archives, my passion for art a silent, internal affair. I could lose myself for hours in the bold, chaotic splashes of a Pollock or the quiet, geometric despair of a Mondrian. Art made sense. It was emotion given form, chaos given structure, my own life. By contrast, felt like a forgery. One Tuesday night, the feeling crested into a wave I could no longer ignore. I'd stayed late at the museum, cataloging a new acquisition of photographs from the 70s images of vibrant, defiant life from the city's underground scenes. The people in those photos were so unapologetically themselves. They stared back at the camera lens with an energy that felt alien to me, a kind of freedom I couldn't comprehend. I walked home through the damp streets of my small neighborhood, the city's neon glow slicking the pavement into a watercolor painting. My apartment was a tiny, characterless box, its only real feature a large, cheap mirror leaning against one wall. It was a necessity for making sure my tie was straight. My hair was parted correctly, all the small, mundane checks that maintained the facade of Dorian. That night, I slumped onto my bed, my work bag hitting the floor with a dull thud. The neon sign from the bodega across the street pulsed through my window, casting my room in a sickly pink and green glow. I caught my reflection in the mirror, and I froze. It wasn't that I didn't recognize the features. The face staring back was mine. Technically, the high cheekbones that always seemed a little too soft, the lips that were a bit too thin and downturned, the deep-set eyes that held a perpetual weariness. It was all familiar. Yet, the composition was wrong. It was like looking at a well-executed portrait of someone you'd never met. A stranger was living in my skin, looking out through my eyes. The hum in my head became a roar. I stood up and walked slowly toward the mirror, as if approaching a timid animal. My reflection copied the movement, its steps hesitant, its posture stooped in a way that spoke of a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I raised a hand, and the stranger raised his. I pressed my fingertips against the cool glass, my real fingers meeting their ghostly twins. "This isn't me," I whispered. The words felt foreign in my own mouth, a shocking confession spoken into the silent room. They hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. It wasn't a thought anymore. It was a declaration. The person I presented to the world, the man in the sensible cardigan, was an elaborate, exhausting performance. And I didn't know how much longer I could stay on stage. This feeling, this profound sense of alienation from my own body, wasn't new. It had been my shadow for as long as I could remember. It was the reason I avoided team sports in school. The reason I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach in locker rooms. The reason my romantic encounters had always felt stilted and disingenuous, as if I were reading from a script. I was playing the part of a boy, and then a man, and I was a terrible actor. For the first time. However, I had said it out loud. The stranger in the mirror didn't flinch. He just looked back at me, his eyes filled with a familiar, bottomless sorrow. But now, mixed with the sadness, there was a flicker of something else. A question. If this wasn't me, then who was? The confession in my empty apartment was a crack in the dam. The feelings I had suppressed for decades began to seep through, then trickle, then pour. My days at the museum became harder. I would see women walking through the galleries, and I would feel a pang of something I couldn't name. It wasn't desire, not in the way most men would understand it. It was a strange, painful sort of envy. I envied the way a silk scarf draped around a woman's neck, the gentle sway of a pleated skirt, the soft click of her heels on the polished floor. It was a different language of being, one I longed to speak but didn't know the words for. My carefully constructed world was beginning to feel like a prison. The cardigans felt heavy and suffocating. The stiff collars of my shirts chafed against my neck. I was drowning in drab colors and sensible fabrics. The static in my head was constant now, a relentless noise that made it hard to focus on my work, to engage in small talk with colleagues, to simply exist. Finally, after another sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, I did something I had been putting off for years. I made an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Chen's office was a calm oasis of soft lighting, comfortable armchairs, and shelves filled with books. She was a kind-faced woman in her 50s with a soothing voice that immediately put me at ease. In our first few sessions, I talked around the issue. I spoke of anxiety, of a feeling of detachment, of not fitting in. I used vague, clinical terms I'd learned from reading articles online. I was building a wall of words to hide behind. Dr. Chen listened patiently, never pushing, just nodding and asking gentle, probing questions. It was in our 4th session that she finally asked the one that mattered. "Dorian," she said, her eyes full of a soft, non-judgmental curiosity. "You speak about your body as if it's a suit you're wearing. If you could take it off and choose another, what would it look like? What would it feel like?" The question hung in the air between us. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. My palms grew damp. This was it. The edge of the cliff. I swallowed hard. "Softer," I heard myself say. The word a mere whisper. I think I'd want to feel softer, lighter. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "Tell me more about that. What does softer mean to you?" The words started to tumble out, clumsy and unpracticed. "I don't know. Just less hard, less angular. The way I move feels wrong. It's all sharp movements, heavy steps. I want grace. I want to feel pretty." The word pretty felt like a grenade I had just lobbed into the calm, quiet room. It was a word I'd never dared to associate with myself. A secret, shameful desire. I braced for a reaction: pity, confusion, maybe even revulsion. But Dr. Chen just smiled. A small, encouraging smile. "There is nothing wrong with wanting to feel pretty. Dorian, many people want that. You said you feel like you're playing a part. What part do you feel you should be playing?" I looked down at my hands, twisting them in my lap. "I don't think it's a part," I said, my voice cracking. I think I'm supposed to be a woman. There it was, the truth, laid bare in that safe, quiet room. I finally had a name for the feeling, a concept to hold on to. It wasn't just a strange mood or a phase. It was my identity, screaming to be let out. I felt a wave of terror, but underneath it, for the first time in my life, there was a profound sense of relief. Dr. Chen didn't miss a beat. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said softly. That must have taken a great deal of courage to say out loud. She then suggested something that both thrilled and terrified me. Perhaps it would be helpful to explore that feeling in a safe way, not as a performance, but as an experience, to simply see how it feels. Have you ever considered trying on clothes that align with that part of yourself? The suggestion sparked. The years of quiet envy, of furtive glances at shop windows, of a deep, inexplicable yearning, all coalesced into a single, powerful desire. The hesitation was still there, a cold knot of fear in my stomach. What if someone saw me? What if I looked ridiculous? What if this was all a terrible mistake? But the cow-cat, the deep, soul-level craving was stronger. It was a thirst I had ignored for a lifetime. And suddenly, I needed a drink of water more than anything else in the world. For a week. Dr. Chen's suggestion echoed in my mind. The fear and the desire waged a silent war within me. I'd walk past women's clothing stores, my pace quickening, my eyes fixed straight ahead, my heart thudding a guilty rhythm. Then, at night, I'd lie awake and imagine it the feel of silk, the drape of a skirt, the simple freedom of a blouse that wasn't designed to hide and contain, but to flow. The craving won. On a gray Saturday afternoon, I found myself standing outside a small, unassuming vintage shop in the East Village. Its windows were cluttered with antique lamps and whimsically dressed mannequins. It seemed less intimidating than a bright, modern department store. It felt like a place where secrets were kept, where the past was not just remembered but worn. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. A small bell chimed as I stepped inside. Announcing my intrusion, the shop smelled of cedar, old paper, and a faint hint of lavender. It was quiet, save for the soft jazz music playing from a hidden speaker. A woman with short silver hair and bright, intelligent eyes looked up from behind a counter piled high with beaded purses. She gave me a warm, simple smile and then went back to her work, leaving me to my own devices. Her lack of scrutiny was a small, profound gift. I drifted through the racks, my fingers ghosting over the fabrics, velvet, satin, coarse wool, delicate cotton. It was a sensory overload. I felt like a spy in a foreign land, my presence a transgression. My sensible trousers and gray cardigan felt laughably out of place. My eyes landed on it, tucked away on a crowded rack. It was a simple, high-necked blouse from what looked like the 1940s. It was made of a soft, creamy white lace with tiny pearl buttons running up the front. It was elegant and understated. It was beautiful. And it was terrifying. I glanced around. The shop was empty except for me and the owner. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the blouse from the rack. The hanger felt impossibly light in my hand. I walked, as if in a dream, to the back of the store where a single dressing room was curtained off with heavy velvet fabric. Inside the cramped space, I leaned against the wall, the blouse clutched in my hand. This was insane. I was a man, a quiet, bookish art history intern. What was I doing? But then I looked at the blouse again, at the intricate pattern of the lace, and the deep, abiding need washed over me once more. Slowly, I took off my cardigan and my stiff collared shirt. I was left in my plain white undershirt. My hands were shaking so much that I fumbled with the tiny pearl buttons of the blouse. Finally, I managed to undo them. I slipped my arms into the sleeves. The sensation was electric. The fabric was unimaginably soft and cool against my skin, a feeling completely alien to the rough cotton and wool I was used to. It didn't constrain me. It settled over me. Light as a whisper, I turned to the small, age-spotted mirror in the dressing room and slowly, painstakingly, began to do up the buttons. As the last pearl button slipped into place, I looked up, and I saw her. It was still my face, of course. My short hair, my jawline, the shadows under my eyes. But the blouse changed everything. The high lace collar framed my face, softening it. The delicate fabric draped over my shoulders and chest in a way that suggested curves that weren't there, hinting at a different shape, a different form. It was as if the blouse knew the person I was supposed to be and was gently trying to reveal her. A tremor ran through my entire body. It wasn't just a physical shudder. It was a seismic shift in my soul. This felt right. In a way nothing in my life had ever felt right. The stranger in my apartment mirror was still there, but she was looking at me with a dawning sense of recognition. The sorrow in her eyes was being replaced by a fragile, flickering hope. I wasn't just trying on a piece of clothing. I was touching the truth. I was peeling back a layer of the lie I had been living and getting a glimpse of the real person underneath. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just breathing, feeling the soft lace against my skin, staring at the woman in the mirror who was both me and not me. The war inside me was over. The craving had not been a whim. It had been a homing signal. Finally, I carefully unbuttoned the blouse, folded it with a reverence I usually reserved for ancient manuscripts, and put my old, familiar costume back on. It felt heavier than ever before. As I paid for the blouse, my voice barely a croak, the kind-eyed owner simply smiled. "It's a beautiful piece," she said. "It will look lovely on you. The casual," affirming you almost made me buckle at the knees. Back in my apartment, I didn't put the blouse in the closet. I laid it carefully across the foot of my bed. That night, I stood before my own large mirror again. The neon from the street still pulsed, but the reflection felt different, less alien. I looked at my own face, my own form, and I whispered to the person staring back, the promise of the lace blouse still a phantom sensation on my skin. Perhaps I have always been her. The white lace blouse was a beginning. For weeks, it was my secret. At night, after the city had quieted and I was safely locked in my apartment, I would take it out and put it on. I'd just sit in it, feeling its softness, letting the truth of that feeling sink into my bones. It was my private ritual, a silent communion with the woman in the mirror. My therapy sessions with Dr. Chen became my anchor. I talked about the blouse, about the overwhelming feeling of rightness it gave me. We talked about what came next. The idea of hormone replacement therapy, HRT, was floated. It was a word that carried immense weight, a threshold that seemed both terrifying and full of promise. It wasn't about trying on a feeling anymore. It was about becoming. I spent months researching, reading medical journals, and scrolling through the stories of others who had walked this path. The potential changes were profound, softer skin, redistribution of body fat, changes in emotion, the development of breasts. Each one was a bullet point on a list that read like a map to my true self. The fear was real, the fear of the unknown, of the irreversible, of society's judgment. But the fear of remaining Dorian, of suffocating inside that gray cardigan for the rest of my life, was infinitely greater. With Dr. Chen's guidance, I found an endocrinologist and made the appointment. The day I took my first dose of estradiol was anticlimactic. It was just a small pill, swallowed with a glass of water. But as it dissolved inside me, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I had finally chosen a direction. I was no longer drifting. I was sailing toward a distant, hoped-for shore. The changes were slow at first, almost imperceptible. A month in, I noticed my skin felt softer to the touch. The scent of my own body began to change, becoming less sharp, something sweeter. My emotions felt closer to the surface, more accessible. I cried watching a sappy commercial, something that would have been unthinkable for the stoic, reserved Dorian. It felt less like a loss of control and more like a reconnection to a part of myself that had been numb for years. With this internal shift came the need for a new name. Dorian was the title of a book I no longer wanted to read. He was the man in the ill-fitting suit. I spent nights with a notebook, trying on names like I was trying on clothes. I wanted something that felt like me, something that held both warmth and strength. I found it in an old book of names. Emberlyn. It meant spark, or ember. It felt perfect. I wasn't a roaring fire. Not yet. I was a small, glowing ember, a flicker of warmth and light in the ashes of the person I used to be. The name felt like a promise. My secret explorations expanded. I bought my first tube of lipstick, a sheer, rosy pink. The first time I applied it, my hands were clumsy. I stood in my bathroom, staring at my reflection. The small touch of color transformed my face, my lips, which had always seemed thin and severe, now looked softer, fuller. It was such a small thing, a slick of colored wax, but it felt like magic. I felt a giddy, childish thrill, followed by a hot flush of shame. I immediately wiped it off, my heart racing, but a few minutes later, I applied it again, and this time, I let myself smile. One afternoon, a package I had ordered online arrived. It was my first pair of women's jeans and a simple, soft-spun sweater. Trying them on felt different from the blouse. This was everyday wear. This was a statement not of elegance, but of existence. The jeans were cut differently, designed to accommodate hips, and even though mine were still slender, the fabric settled in a new, more comfortable way. The sweater was soft and clung lightly to my torso. I looked in the mirror and saw not a man in women's clothes, but the faint outline of a woman. A very tall, very shy woman, but a woman nonetheless. That weekend, I gathered my courage. I put on the jeans, the sweater, and a light coat. I didn't wear makeup. I just pulled a beanie over my short hair and walked out the door. My goal was simple: walk to the coffee shop on the corner, order a latte, and walk back. It was a 500-foot journey that felt like a marathon. Every footstep was fraught with anxiety. I was convinced every person I passed was staring, pointing, whispering. I kept my head down, my hands shoved deep in my pockets. In the coffee shop, when the barista asked for my order, I could barely speak. But then, as I waited for my drink, a woman leaving with her child accidentally bumped into me. "Oh, excuse me, ma'am," she said, not even giving me a second glance. The word hit me like a physical blow, but a pleasant one. Ma'am. She had seen me, briefly, and her brain had registered woman. It was a tiny, fleeting moment of validation, a drop of rain in a desert. But it was everything. I took my coffee, my hands trembling, and practically ran back to my apartment. Once inside, I leaned against the door, my heart pounding with a wild mix of terror and pure, unadulterated joy. The ember was glowing brighter. The small victories fueled a growing confidence. The hormones were working their subtle magic, softening the sharp edges of my body and my psyche. My hips began to carry a little more curve, my waist a little more definition. The face in the mirror was slowly but surely becoming my own. Emberlyn was starting to feel less like a name I had chosen and more like the name I had always had. My explorations in clothing grew bolder. I graduated from jeans and sweaters to skirts and blouses. I learned the quiet power of accessories, a delicate silver necklace, a pair of simple earrings. Each new item was a step further away from Dorian and a step closer to myself. But I was still hiding. Emberlyn existed only within the four walls of my apartment or on brief, nerve-wracking excursions into the world. The thought of presenting as her full-time, at work, to the few friends I had, was a terrifying mountain I wasn't yet ready to climb. One evening, browsing online, I saw it. It was a cocktail dress in a vintage-inspired boutique. The color was what caught my eye first, a deep, luminous jade green, the color of moss after a rainstorm. It had a classic, elegant cut with a sweetheart neckline, a fitted waist, and a skirt that fell just to the knees. It was beautiful, sophisticated, and utterly beyond anything I had ever dared to imagine for myself. I obsessed over it for days. I would open the browser tab and just stare at it. It represented a version of Emberlyn I hadn't even met yet, a confident, graceful woman who could wear a dress like that and feel at home in it. It was an aspirational purchase, a totem of the person I hoped to become, on impulse. Fueled by a surge of bravery I couldn't explain, I clicked buy when the box arrived. I left it sitting on my table for 2 days, too nervous to open it. It felt like a Pandora's box of my own hopes and fears. What if it didn't fit? What if I looked like a parody, a man playing dress-up in his sister's clothes? The old insecurities were still potent. Finally, on a Friday night, I poured myself a small glass of wine, put on some soft music, and opened the box. The dress was wrapped in tissue paper that crinkled like autumn leaves. As I lifted it out, the fabric a heavy, luxurious satin spilled through my fingers, cool and smooth. It was even more beautiful in person. I undressed slowly, my heart thudding a nervous rhythm. I stepped into the dress and pulled it up. The satin slid over my skin, a glorious, sensual feeling. I reached behind me, my fingers fumbling with the zipper. It snagged for a moment, and my breath caught in my throat. Then, with a gentle pull, it slid smoothly all the way to the top. I stood there for a moment with my eyes closed, just feeling it. The dress hugged my torso, the boning in the bodice giving me a shape that was both new and intimately familiar. The weight of the skirt felt substantial, elegant. Then, I opened my eyes and looked in the mirror. The breath left my body in a rush. The person staring back at me was not Dorian, not even close. It was a woman. Her shoulders, softened by the hormones, looked delicate under the thin straps of the dress. The sweetheart neckline hinted at the small, tender curve of my developing breasts. The cinched waist flowed into the gentle flare of my hips, creating a silhouette I had only ever dreamed of. The jade green fabric made my skin look creamy and my eyes darker. It was me. It was her. It was Emberlyn, fully realized, standing in the soft light of my small apartment. A choked sob escaped my lips. Tears began to stream down my face, hot and unstoppable. But they weren't tears of sadness or grief. They were tears of overwhelming, cathartic release. It was the tearing down of a wall that had been built brick by brick over a lifetime. It was the joy of a homecoming after a long, painful exile. The stranger was gone. The woman in the mirror wasn't a stranger at all. She was the person I had been searching for my entire life. She looked back at me, her eyes wet with the same tears, and for the first time, she smiled. A real, genuine, soul-deep smile. And I smiled back. In that jade green dress, I wasn't pretending, I wasn't performing. I was simply, finally, breathtakingly myself. I turned from side to side, watching the satin skirt swirl around my legs. I walked across my small living room, feeling the unfamiliar but wonderful sensation of the dress moving with me. This was what grace felt like. This was what it felt like to be home in your own skin. The vision of myself in the jade green dress was a turning point. It was no longer enough to be Emberlyn in secret. The joy of that moment was too profound to be contained within the walls of my apartment. I needed to live it. The first, most terrifying step was my job. I couldn't imagine walking into the hallowed, hushed halls of MoMA as Emberlyn. The thought of the polite but confused stares from my colleagues, the inevitable conversation with my supervisor, Dr. Reeves, it was too much. I needed a bridge, a transitional space where I could be myself without having to explain or defend myself. I quit my internship. It was a painful decision, a departure from a path I had worked so hard to follow, but I knew it was necessary. Dorian the art historian had to be put on hold so Emberlyn the person could learn to live. I needed an income, and more than that, I needed a community. I found a job listing online that seemed almost too good to be true. Part-time host and server wanted for the spotlight. An inclusive queer arts lounge. All identities welcome. No experience necessary, just a good attitude and a love for the arts. The spotlight was a cozy, warmly lit bar in the West Village known for its open mic nights, drag shows, and poetry slams. It was a sanctuary for the city's queer community. The idea of working there was both exhilarating and petrifying. I decided to apply as Emberlyn. I put on my best pair of dark jeans, a simple but elegant black silk blouse, and a pair of low, comfortable ankle boots. I applied a little makeup foundation, a touch of mascara, and the rosy pink lipstick that had become my signature. Looking in the mirror, I saw a nervous but determined woman. My hair was still short, but I'd started letting it grow out, and I'd styled it to look softer, more feminine. The manager was a woman named Marcy. She was in her 40s, with a shock of purple hair, a constellation of piercings, and the warmest, most disarming smile I had ever seen. She looked me up and down, not with judgment, but with a friendly appraisal. "Hi, I'm Marcy," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "You must be Emberlyn." Hearing my name spoken so casually, so naturally, by a stranger sent a jolt through me. "Yes, that's me," I managed to say, my voice a little higher than usual. The interview was less of an interrogation and more of a conversation. She asked me about my interest in the arts, and I found myself speaking passionately about painting and sculpture. She seemed to like my quiet, thoughtful energy. "Look," she said, leaning forward on her elbows. "This place is a family. Sometimes it's a loud, dysfunctional family. But we look out for each other. The most important thing here is respect. We have a zero-tolerance policy for any kind of bigotry. Can you handle that?" "Yes," I said, my voice full of conviction. "I can." "Good. One last thing. What are your pronouns?" she asked. As simply as if she were asking my favorite color. The question stunned me into silence for a second. No one had ever asked me that before. I had spent my life being assigned a pronoun that felt like a scratchy wool sweater on a hot day. To be given the choice, to be invited to declare myself, was a powerful gift. Her, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Marcy just nodded. "Great. Welcome to the family. Emberlyn, you can start Friday." My first night at the Spotlight was a baptism by fire. The place was packed, a vibrant, noisy swirl of people from every corner of the queer spectrum. The air buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the sound of a poet performing a raw, emotional piece on the small stage. My job was simple: greet people at the door, show them to tables, take drink orders. I was clumsy and awkward. I nearly dropped a tray of drinks. I fumbled with the cash register. I felt gangly and conspicuous, but something incredible was happening. All night long, people were calling me Emberlyn, my coworkers would say. "Emberlyn. Can you grab that table or Marcy needs to see you in the back?" "She's over there," patrons would say. "Excuse me." Missed to get my attention. Each instance of being gendered correctly was a small affirmation, a confirmation that the woman I saw in the mirror was visible to others. Too, the constant, low-level anxiety I used to feel in public began to recede, replaced by a feeling of belonging. These people weren't just tolerating me, they were accepting me as one of their own. Toward the end of the night, a regular, a flamboyant older man named Arthur, touched my arm as I cleared his glass. "You're new here?" "Darling," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You have a lovely, gentle energy." "Thank you," I stammered, blushing. The compliment landed in a way none ever had before. It wasn't about my work or my intellect. It was about me, my presence, my aura. It was a compliment for Emberlyn. As I learned the ropes, I also started to learn about myself. I experimented more with my presentation, encouraged by Marcy and my new friends. I started wearing dresses to work simple, comfortable ones at first, then more daring styles. I learned how to walk in heels, my initial wobbly, painful steps gradually transforming into a confident stride. Each shift was a new discovery. The sway of a skirt against my legs, the satisfying click of a heel on the floor, these were the physical sensations that reinforced the emotional truth. I wasn't just playing a part. I was embodying myself. The Spotlight wasn't just a job. It was my school, my sanctuary, and my stage. Months passed, and the Spotlight became my world, the shy, tentative woman who had walked in for her interview was slowly blossoming. I found a rhythm in the nightly chaos, a comfort in the community that embraced me without question. My confidence grew in small, incremental steps. I started to develop my own style, moving beyond just emulating others and finding what truly felt like me. I discovered a love for A-line skirts, for soft cashmere sweaters, for the simple elegance of a silk blouse. My makeup became more refined. I learned how to apply eyeliner to make my eyes look bigger, how to find the right shade of blush to give my face a warm glow. These weren't acts of disguise. They were acts of revelation, each brushstroke helping to bring the woman inside to the surface. My voice began to change, too, partly due to the hormones, but also through conscious effort. I practiced speaking in a higher register, not to sound fake, but to find a pitch that felt more aligned with my identity. I started reading poetry aloud in my apartment, listening to the cadence and tone, shaping the sounds until the voice I heard felt like my own. One evening, during the weekly open mic night, the scheduled host called in sick. Marcy was running around, stressed, trying to handle everything at once. "Emberlyn," she called out, spotting me by the bar. "I need a huge favor. Can you host tonight? Just introduce the acts, keep things moving. You have a great voice for it, calm and clear." Panic seized me. Me on stage with a microphone. The thought was terrifying. All my life, I had tried to be invisible. The stage was the opposite of that. I don't know. Marcy, I stammered. I've never done anything like that. "There's a first time for everything," she said, pressing a list of names into my hand. "You'll be great. Just be yourself. Just be yourself." It was the thing I was only just learning how to do. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stepped onto the small, brightly lit stage. The chatter in the lounge died down as all eyes turned to me. For a second, I thought I was going to be sick. Then I looked out at the sea of faces familiar, friendly, supportive faces. I saw Arthur give me an encouraging wink. I saw my co-workers give me a thumbs up from behind the bar. I took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "And welcome to the spotlight." As I introduced the first poet, something shifted. The microphone amplified the voice I had been carefully cultivating, and hearing it fill the room was a strange, powerful experience. It sounded like me. It sounded like Emberlyn. I hosted the entire night, my initial nervousness slowly melting away, replaced by a quiet, buzzing excitement. I found a natural, easy banter with the performers and the audience. My gentle humor, once hidden deep inside, began to surface. I was no longer just a server taking orders. I was a presence, a part of the art being created in that space. By the end of the night, I was glowing. People came up to me to say I'd done a wonderful job. Marcy gave me a tight hug. "I knew you had it in you," she said. That night marked a new chapter for me. I started hosting the open mic night regularly. The stage became my training ground for a new kind of confidence. It taught me how to hold space, how to command attention not with volume, but with quiet charisma. I began to see myself not as a flawed man trying to be a woman, but simply as a woman who was a bit shy, a bit witty, and apparently, a pretty good host. The performance of being Dorian had been an exhausting lie. The performance of being Emberlyn on stage felt like the most honest thing in the world. The stage at the spotlight brought me light, but it also taught me that where there is light, there are always shadows. The world inside the lounge was a warm, protective bubble. But the world outside was not always so kind. Sometimes, that world found its way in. It was a busy Saturday night. The lounge was packed, the energy high. I was on stage, wearing a simple, elegant navy blue satin dress that shimmered under the lights. I felt beautiful, confident. I was introducing a young singer-songwriter when I heard it. A loud, slurred voice from a table near the back cut through the applause. "Hey, look at the guy in the dress." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs. The warm, buzzing energy in the room instantly turned cold and sharp. My carefully constructed confidence shattered into a million pieces. In that one cruel moment, I wasn't Emberlyn, the host and artist. I was a freak, a fraud, a guy in a dress. The room fell silent. Every eye was on me. I stood frozen in the glare of the spotlight, my face burning with shame. The man at the back, a burly, red-faced tourist who had clearly had too much to drink, laughed. "What's the matter?" he sneered. "Cat got your tongue, fella." My mind went blank. The old Dorian, the one who knew how to make himself small and disappear, was screaming at me to run, to hide. My hands trembled. I wanted to curl up into a ball right there on the stage. But then, something else happened. Marcy was moving. She strode from behind the bar with a look of thunder on her face, her purple hair seeming to bristle with rage. She got to the man's table and leaned down, her voice low but carrying across the silent room. "Get out," she said. It wasn't a request. "I was just having some fun," the man slurred, gesturing at me. "It's a dude, right?" "She is an artist." Marcy's voice was like steel. "She is a valued member of our staff. And you are a hateful drunk who doesn't know how to recognize real beauty," I said. "Get out. Now." Two of the bouncers flanked Marcy, their presence leaving no room for argument. The man grumbled, but he and his friends got up and stumbled out, followed by a wave of quiet hisses from the other patrons. The door closed, and the silence lingered. I was still standing on the stage, paralyzed, feeling raw and exposed. Then, someone in the audience started to clap, a slow, steady rhythm. Another person joined in, and then another, until the entire room was filled with a warm, rolling wave of applause. It wasn't for a performance. It was for me. It was a shield, a balm, a collective embrace. My eyes filled with tears. I managed a weak, watery smile and nodded to the musician I was supposed to introduce, my voice barely a whisper. "Please, give a warm welcome to Sarah." I stumbled off the stage as she began to play, and one of my coworkers immediately wrapped me in a hug. I spent the rest of the night in the back, trying to pull myself together, the heckler's words replaying in my mind like a poisoned mantra. The incident left a scar. It reminded me that my identity, which felt so real and natural to me, was seen as a costume or a joke by others. It taught me that living authentically meant being vulnerable to a kind of cruelty I had never experienced as Dorian. But as the initial pain began to fade, something else took its place, a quiet, steely resolve. Hiding wasn't an option anymore. Retreating back into the gray, shapeless world of Dorian would be a betrayal of the woman in the jade green dress, the woman who had found her voice on that stage. The world might try to hurt me, but I wouldn't let it break me. I decided to turn the wound into a weapon. I started working harder on my voice, not just to sound more feminine, but to make it stronger, more resonant. I started studying acting and movement, learning how to carry my body with unshakable poise. The heckler had tried to reduce me to a punchline. I decided, then and there, that I would be the one to write my own story, and it wouldn't be a comedy or a tragedy. It would be a story of resilience. The spotlight was no longer just a place of performance, it was my battleground, and I was determined to win. Life found a new dual rhythm. By night, I was Emberlyn, the increasingly poised host of the spotlight, wrapped in satin and confidence. But the academic flame within me hadn't been extinguished. It had only been banked. The world of art history still called to me, but I wanted to approach it from a new perspective now, one that was informed by my own lived experience. Dr. Reeves, my old mentor from the museum, had kept in touch. He was a kind, brilliant man who had always been more interested in my mind than my presentation. When I came out to him over coffee one afternoon, he had simply nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Well," he'd said after a moment, "that explains a great deal about your fascination with the fluidity of identity in Cindy Sherman's work. It makes sense." His academic, almost detached acceptance was, in its own way, as comforting as Marcy's fierce protectiveness. He was the one who encouraged me to apply for the PhD program at NYU. "Your perspective is unique. Emberlyn," he told me, "the art world needs your voice." Fueled by his belief in me, I applied. I wrote my entrance essay on the concept of the body as a canvas for identity in performance art. I was accepted. NYU was a different world from the spotlight. It was a world of theory and critique, of late-night study sessions and the smell of old books. I navigated it as Emberlyn, my legal name and gender markers now officially changed. It was daunting at first, but the academic environment, for the most part, respected my identity on an intellectual level. I was a data point in their diversity statistics, a living example of the theories we discussed in class. It was in a seminar on postmodernism that I met Riley. She was an undergraduate student in the fine arts program, a painter. She was vibrant, with a cascade of curly red hair that she was constantly pushing out of her face, and fingers that were perpetually stained with flecks of turquoise and cadmium yellow, where I was quiet and observant. Riley was expressive and effusive. She wasn't just in the world. She wrestled with it, embraced it, and smeared it on a canvas. We were assigned to a group project together, analyzing the depiction of the body in the works of a postmodern photographer. Our academic partnership quickly evolved. Our study sessions in the library would bleed into long conversations at a nearby coffee shop. We talked about art, of course, but soon we were talking about everything else: our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. Riley was endlessly curious about my life, but her curiosity was never voyeuristic. She wasn't interested in the clinical details of my transition. She was interested in how it felt. She would ask questions no one else had ever thought to ask. "When you found that perfect shade of lipstick," she asked me once, her chin resting in her paint-stained hands, "did it feel like you were putting on a color, or revealing one that was already there?" "Revealing one," I answered without hesitation. "Definitely revealing." She smiled, a wide, brilliant smile that made her eyes sparkle. "I thought so. It's like when I find the exact right blue for a sky, it doesn't feel like I'm inventing it. It feels like I'm remembering it." She understood. In her artist's soul, she understood the process of bringing an inner truth into outer form with her. I didn't feel like a subject to be analyzed or a cause to be defended. I just felt like a person. Our friendship deepened over the semester. Riley started coming to the spotlight on open mic nights. She would sit at a small table near the front, sketching in her notebook. Her eyes fixed on me while I was on stage. Her presence was a quiet, steadying anchor. Seeing her in the crowd made me feel seen in a way that was different from the general adoration of the audience. She wasn't just seeing Emberlyn the host, she was seeing me. After my shifts, we would walk through the sleeping city streets, the air cool and crisp. It was on these walks that our conversations grew more intimate. We talked about the fears that kept us up at night. She spoke of her terror of creating meaningless art, of her canvases ending up as nothing more than colored dust. I spoke of my fear of never being seen as whole, of always being seen as a before and an after. I hate that, I confessed one night, my voice soft. The idea that I was one person and now I'm another, that Dorian was the real me and Emberlyn is some kind of construction, it doesn't feel like that at all. It feels like I was a statue that was trapped inside a block of marble. And I've just spent years chipping away the stone that wasn't me. Riley stopped walking and turned to me, her expression serious in the glow of a street lamp. "Anyone who thinks that is an idiot with no imagination," she said fiercely. "You're the most real person I know." Her words were a balm to a wound I hadn't even realized was still so tender. One evening, we were in her studio, a chaotic, wonderful space that smelled of turpentine and linseed oil. Canvases were everywhere, some finished, some just barely begun. She was working on a portrait, and she was frustrated, dabbing at the canvas with an impatient brush. I was sitting on a stool, watching her. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large warehouse window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "If you could be anyone in the world," she asked suddenly, not looking at me, her focus still on the canvas, a historical figure, a celebrity, anyone, who would you choose to be? It was a hypothetical question, a game, but for me, the answer was simple and profound. I smiled softly. I wouldn't choose anyone else. I said, "I've spent too long trying to become myself. I'd just choose to be me." Riley put her brush down and turned to look at me. The golden light caught in her red hair, making it look like a halo. She studied my face for a long moment, her artist's eyes taking in every detail. She wasn't looking at a man or a woman or a trans person. She was just looking at Emberlyn. "Yeah," she said, her voice quiet. "I think I'd choose for you to be you, too." The intensity in her gaze made my heart skip a beat. The air in the studio suddenly felt thick, charged with an unspoken energy. The comfortable boundary of our friendship seemed to dissolve, leaving something more delicate and shimmering in its place. The dynamic between us had shifted. There was a new awareness, a gentle tension that was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. We were circling something, both of us hesitant to be the first one to name it. A few days later, we made plans to go to a botanical garden in Brooklyn. It was a beautiful, sunny afternoon, for the first time. I felt confident enough to wear something truly, unapologetically feminine for a casual day out. I chose a simple, flowing white maxi dress made of soft cotton. It felt wonderful against my skin, the skirt whispering around my ankles as I walked. As a final touch, I picked a small, white daisy from a pot on my windowsill and tucked it behind my ear. When I met Riley at the subway station, she just stared at me for a moment. her mouth slightly open. "Wow," she breathed. I felt a blush creep up my neck. Is it too much?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. "No," she said, her voice full of a genuine awe that melted my anxiety. "It's not too much. It's perfect. You're so beautiful." Emberlyn. It wasn't the first time someone had called me beautiful since I'd transitioned, but the way Riley said it was different. It wasn't a compliment tinged with surprise or qualified with a subtext of for a trans woman. It was a simple, absolute statement of fact. She was a painter, an expert in beauty, and she was telling me that I was beautiful. The words landed directly in my heart, and I felt like I could cry with relief and joy. For the first time, I truly believed it. We spent the afternoon wandering through the gardens, our shoulders brushing against each other. We talked and laughed, and the unspoken thing between us grew stronger with every shared glance. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawns, we found ourselves in the quiet, fragrant rose garden. We were sitting on a stone bench, surrounded by the heavy scent of blooming flowers. "Emberlyn," Riley said, her voice soft. She reached out and gently touched the daisy in my hair, her fingers brushing against my temple. The touch was light as a feather, but it sent a shiver through my entire body. "Riley," I whispered back, my voice barely audible. She leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I leaned in to meet her. Her lips were soft, tentative. The kiss was gentle, a question more than a demand. It was hesitant and trembling, but filled with all the unspoken warmth that had been growing between us for months. It was the sweetest, most profoundly affirming moment of my life. When we pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine. I could feel her breath on my skin. "See," she whispered, "just you." In that moment, under the rose-scented twilight, I finally understood. I wasn't wearing a costume. I wasn't playing a role. The dress, the flower, the lipstick, they weren't tools of deception. They were expressions of a truth that had finally been set free. Riley's kiss wasn't for a performance or an idea. It was for me. I wasn't a woman in disguise. I was just a woman, being kissed in a garden, and it was the most natural thing in the world. The next few years were a whirlwind of love and labor. Being with Riley was like learning to breathe after a lifetime of holding my breath. Our love was a quiet, creative partnership. She painted me, not just my physical form, but the light and shadows she saw in my soul. I wrote about her art, finding words for the emotions she captured in color. Our lives, like our work, became intertwined. At the same time, I poured myself into my studies. My PhD dissertation became my life's work. I titled it The Transformed Body in Contemporary Art Canvas, Sculpture, and Self. It was a deeply personal piece of scholarship, weaving together art history, queer theory, and my own lived experience. I wrote about the body not as a fixed biological fact, but as a living, evolving work of art, a site of constant creation and recreation. It was the most honest thing I had ever written. The day I successfully defended my dissertation, I walked out of the room feeling 10 feet tall. Dr. Emberlyn. The title felt solid, earned, real. Riley was waiting for me outside with a bouquet of sunflowers, her face beaming. We celebrated that night at the Spotlight, where Marcy and my old family cheered for me so loudly I thought the roof might come off. My academic work started to get noticed. I published a few articles, spoke at a few conferences, and then the impossible happened. I received an email from the Museum of Modern Art, the very place where a timid, confused intern named Dorian used to file photographs in a lonely archive. They were planning a new exhibition. The theme was identity in the 21st century. My dissertation had come to the attention of the head curator, Dr. Reeves. They wanted to know if I would be interested in co-curating the exhibition. The offer felt like a dream, a collision of my past and present so perfect it couldn't possibly be real. To return to the place where my journey of self-discovery had begun, not as an invisible intern, but as a respected expert, a creator. It was overwhelming. It was a perfect, beautiful circle. Of course, I said yes. The exhibition, which we decided to call Identity Reborn, took a year to assemble. It was the most challenging and rewarding work of my life. I worked alongside Dr. Reeves as a colleague, an equal. We brought together pieces from all over the world, paintings, sculptures, photographs, and performance art pieces that explored the complex, fluid nature of the self. As part of the exhibition, I wanted to include work that was deeply personal. I convinced a nervous but excited Riley to submit one of her paintings. It was a portrait she had done of me, titled simply, Emberlyn. In it, I was sitting in her sun-drenched studio, wearing a simple t-shirt, my expression one of quiet contentment. It was me at my most unguarded, my most peaceful, and I decided to include one more piece. I had kept the jade green dress all these years, carefully preserved in a garment bag. It was more than just a piece of clothing. It was a relic of my own rebirth. With the help of a photographer friend, we took a photo. It was a simple, powerful shot of me, standing before a mirror, wearing the dress. The woman in the photo was looking directly at the camera, her smile serene and confident. The reflection in the mirror was looking at her, with the same smile. The two images, the self and the reflection, were finally in perfect harmony. We titled the photograph, The Woman in the Mirror Smiles. The night of the exhibition opening was a surreal dream. The gallery was filled with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the bright lights of the art world. I walked through the rooms, no longer a ghost haunting the white walls, but their master. I wore a floor-length black gown, my hair, now long and flowing, styled in soft waves. Riley was by my side, her hand tucked securely in mine. She looked radiant in a deep blue velvet dress, her red hair a brilliant splash of color against the monochrome elegance of the gallery. People I had once been intimidated by critics, collectors, famous artists came up to congratulate me, to discuss my curatorial choices, to praise the exhibition's vision. They called me Dr. Emberlyn. They shook my hand. They saw me. We rounded a corner and came to the wall where our two pieces were hung. Riley's painting of me was on the left, my photograph on the right. People were gathered around them, speaking in hushed, appreciative tones. I stood there, looking at the image of myself in the jade green dress, the memory of that night, the fear, the revelation. The tears of joy was so vivid. It felt like a lifetime ago, and it felt like yesterday. That woman in the photo, who had felt so new and fragile then, had become the woman standing here tonight, strong and whole. Riley squeezed my hand. You've come so far. Emberlyn, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I turned to her, a slow smile spreading across my face. I thought of the long, winding path that had led me here from a lonely apartment mirror to this grand, public gallery. It hadn't been a journey away from something, but toward something. Not far, I corrected her gently. I've come home. Later in the evening, after the speeches had been made and the applause had faded, I found a quiet moment for myself. I slipped away from the crowd and walked into an adjacent gallery, a permanent exhibit of modern sculpture. The room was empty and silent, the polished surfaces of the metal sculptures gleaming under the track lighting. One of the pieces was a large, perfectly flat sheet of polished chrome, as reflective as any mirror. I stopped in front of it. My reflection stared back at me, a tall woman in a black gown, her eyes clear and bright. There was no trace of the sorrowful stranger I had seen all those years ago. There was no conflict, no confusion, no feeling of being an imposter in my own skin. I saw the art history intern's love for beauty. I saw the performer's quiet confidence. I saw the scholar's sharp intellect. I saw the artist's lover, her heart full. All the different parts of me had finally coalesced into one, harmonious whole. The reflection was no longer a stranger, an adversary, or a question mark. She was just me. I raised a hand, not to the cold surface of the chrome, but to my own cheek, feeling the warmth of my skin. The woman in the reflection copied the gesture, her expression soft and knowing. We had found each other at last. A gentle smile touched my lips. I looked into my own eyes, into the eyes of the woman I had fought so hard to become, the woman I had been all along, and I whispered the words that had been a lifetime in the making. "Hello, you, the one I was always looking for."